Edward Pembroke stood before the old shop in Bath with a heavy heart. The narrow street was quiet, the air filled with the faint scent of rain and cobblestones. The wooden sign above the door still bore his father's name, though the paint was chipped and fading. Inside, the air was thick with the fragrance of oil and varnished oak. Hundreds of clocks lined the walls, their pendulums swinging in uneven harmony. Yet Edward felt an uneasy stillness, as though the shop itself had been waiting for him. His father's workshop at the back was cluttered with tools, sketches, and piles of old gears. Among them stood a tall grandfather clock with dark mahogany casing. Unlike the others, its hands pointed stubbornly to 12, unmoving. Edward touched the glass gently, only to feel a chill spread through his fingertips. That night, as he lay in his father's old room above the shop, he could not sleep. The silence was broken by the faintest sound of ticking. It was not from the clocks that worked, it came from the one that had never moved. Edward descended the stairs, a candle in hand. The grandfather clock loomed tall in the shadows, its face pale and silent. But then, as the candlelight flickered, the hands twitched. Slowly, they shifted forward, 1 second, then another. The bell within struck once. A deep, resonant sound rolled through the workshop. And with that single chime, Edward noticed something impossible. The wall behind the clock shivered, and a thin crack of light appeared, as though the house itself had revealed a hidden door. Edward's breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer, reaching out a trembling hand towards the secret that had just awakened. The crack of light widened as Edward pressed his palm against the wall. Slowly, a hidden door swung inward, its hinges groaning like a creature disturbed from slumber. The air that drifted out was damp and cold, carrying the smell of stone long concealed. He raised his candle, revealing a narrow passage cut into the wall. Dust clung to every surface, and the floor was scattered with broken fragments of brick. Edward hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside. The door closed behind him with a dull thud, sealing him in darkness except for the trembling flame. The passage sloped downward, leading to a chamber beneath the workshop. The room was small, with arched stone walls. In the center stood a wooden table, its surface covered in papers, gears, and strange diagrams that glistened in the candlelight. Edward's eyes caught a leather-bound journal lying open, its ink faded but still legible. He lifted it carefully, reading the first lines. To control time is to master the very pulse of life itself. This shall be the legacy of the Pembroke name. Edward's hands shook. His father had never spoken of such writings. The name on the page was not his father's but his grandfather's, a man Edward barely remembered, known only as stern and distant. As he turned the pages, he saw sketches of clock faces connected to intricate mechanisms. One drawing showed a great wheel with symbols instead of numbers, surrounded by notes written in haste. Then, as the candlelight danced, Edward realized the chamber was not empty. In the farthest corner, a second clock stood, smaller than the one upstairs but identical in style. Its pendulum swayed without sound, moving of its own accord. Edward froze. The flame flickered as if disturbed by breath. He thought he was alone, yet he felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Edward forced himself to take a step closer to the silent clock in the corner. The pendulum swung steadily, though no mechanism powered it. He placed the journal on the table, heart pounding in his chest. The air grew colder. He could see his own breath drifting in pale clouds. Then, a faint scratching reached his ears. It came from the pages of the journal he had just set down. Slowly, words began to appear in fresh ink, curling across the old paper. Beware the 12th chime. Time will not only open doors, it will claim what is owed. Edward staggered back, nearly dropping the candle. His mind reeled, struggling to believe his eyes. The writing was not only impossible, it was happening right before him. The pendulum of the smaller clock began to swing faster, and the faintest tick echoed through the chamber. Edward's candle guttered, its flame shrinking as if starved of air. He reached for the journal again, his fingers brushing the damp ink. The words shimmered before his eyes, as though alive. He turned the page, searching desperately for answers. Sketches of staircases spiraling downward filled the next sheet, ending in a symbol Edward did not recognize. Beneath it, a final line had been written in bold strokes. One blood must finish what the other began. A sudden gust extinguished the candle, plunging the chamber into total darkness. Yet Edward could still hear it, the slow, deliberate ticking of the hidden clock, echoing closer with every beat. Edward stumbled back through the passage, his hands feeling along the damp stone walls. In total darkness, he searched for the hidden door, desperate to escape the suffocating chamber. Then, with a grinding creak, the door gave way, and he emerged into the workshop above. The clocks on the walls were silent. Not a single tick or chime filled the air. The stillness was so complete it pressed against his ears. Edward lit another candle and turned to look at the grandfather clock. Its face remained frozen at 12. Yet the air around it shimmered faintly, as though heat rose from its surface. Then he heard it, the soft shuffle of footsteps across the wooden floorboards. He spun around, the candlelight sweeping across rows of silent clocks. At first, he saw nothing. But in the far corner, a figure stood in the shadows. Tall, thin, dressed in the outline of an old-fashioned coat. The shape was faint, almost translucent, yet unmistakably human. Edward's throat tightened. His instinct urged him to run, but his legs refused to move. The figure did not approach, it simply raised a hand and pointed towards the grandfather clock. The silence deepened. One by one, the clocks began to tick again, each joining in like a chorus. But their rhythm was wrong, out of step, a discordant beating that grew louder and louder. Edward clutched the candle, his knuckles white. The shadow in the corner slowly tilted its head, as though watching his every breath. And then, without warning, the grandfather clock struck once. A single chime rolled through the shop, and the figure vanished, leaving only the echo behind. Sleep did not come that night. Edward sat by the workshop table, the journal open before him, his candle burning low. Every sound of ticking echoed in his mind, though most of the clocks had fallen silent once more. At dawn, he noticed a small envelope tucked between the pages of the journal, sealed with a wax stamp. The seal bore the Pembroke crest, one he had not seen since childhood. With trembling fingers, he broke it open. The letter was dated over 50 years earlier. To my son. If you are reading this, the clock has awakened. You must know the truth. Our family's gift is not only to mark time, but to bend it. Such power comes at a price. One life must always be given, so another may pass unharmed. Do not attempt to silence the clocks. They will not rest. They wait for the 12th chime, and for the blood that must be offered. Your father, Thomas Pembroke. Edward lowered the letter, his skin prickling with cold. His father had never spoken of this Thomas, his own grandfather. And yet here, in his own hand, was a confession too heavy to ignore. He rose to his feet, pacing the workshop. Was this why his father had died so suddenly? Had the family been bound to a bargain no one dared to break? Then, from upstairs, a noise startled him. A loud thud, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floorboards. Edward froze, the letter still in his hand. He was not alone in the house. Edward crept up the staircase, each step groaning beneath his weight. He held the candlestick high, its flame quivering with every draught that leaked through the house. The dragging sound had ceased, leaving only silence thick enough to choke him. At the landing, he paused. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with doors that had not been opened in years. Dust coated the handles, except one. The door to his late father's bedroom stood ajar. Edward swallowed hard and pushed it open. The room was dim, curtains drawn tightly against the pale morning light. His father's old writing desk stood by the window, papers scattered as though disturbed. Upon the floor, faint marks streaked the wood, dragged lines, as if something heavy had been pulled across. Edward knelt, brushing the dust with his fingertips. The trail ended at the wardrobe in the far corner. He rose slowly, pulse hammering in his ears. The wardrobe door rattled once, then fell still. "Who's there?" Edward whispered, though he already dreaded the answer. The silence deepened. Then, with agonizing slowness, the wardrobe creaked open. Darkness pooled within, yet from its depths came a sound that froze Edward's veins. Tick, tick, tick. A clock was inside. But not just a clock, he could see the outline of a figure standing behind it, tall and unmoving, its eyes catching the candlelight. Edward stumbled back, nearly dropping the flame. The figure stepped forward, one hand resting on the clock's pendulum, as though guiding its swing. And then, in a voice hollow and cold, it spoke. "You are the one who must finish it." Edward's breath caught in his throat. The figure stood only a few paces away, its form wavering like smoke. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed faintly, fixed upon him with unblinking patience. "What do you mean?" Edward forced the words out, his voice breaking. The figure raised its hand and pointed to the letter still clutched in Edward's fist. The wax seal had cracked, but the words remained etched in his mind: one life must always be given. The pendulum of the clock behind the figure began to swing faster, the ticking growing sharp, relentless. Edward felt the vibration echo through the floorboards, rattling the very bones of the house. He backed towards the doorway, but the handle twisted itself, the door slamming shut with a force that shook the walls. He was trapped. The figure moved closer, not walking but gliding, its presence pressing against Edward like a heavy weight. With each step, the ticking grew louder, blending into the sound of distant chimes. Edward realized, with a sickening jolt, that the clocks were counting down. The 12th chime was coming, and when it struck, the choice would be forced upon him. "Why me?" he whispered, his hands trembling. "Why must I pay for what was never mine?" The figure tilted its head, the candlelight flickering across its hollow face. And in a voice that seemed to echo from every clock in the house, it answered. "Because blood remembers, even when you do not." A sudden gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candle. In the darkness, the ticking swelled, merging into a dreadful harmony. 11 strokes rang out in unison. The 12th was coming. The 11th chime faded, leaving the house trembling in silence. Edward's chest rose and fell in frantic bursts, the letter crushed in his grip. He could feel it, the weight of generations pressing down, demanding their due. Then the 12th chime began. The sound was deeper than before, resonating through the walls, the floor, the very air. The figure loomed before him, one hand stretched toward Edward, the other still guiding the pendulum's relentless swing. "Choose," the voice thundered. Edward's mind raced. One life must be given. But whose? His? Or could the curse be broken another way? He staggered back, his eyes darting to the desk. Among the scattered papers lay the journal, its pages filled with warnings, diagrams, and desperate scribbles. One line caught his eye, scrawled hastily across a margin: "Destroy the heart, and the clock will fall silent." The heart. Edward's gaze snapped to the grandfather clock. Its pendulum swung wildly now, the glass trembling in its frame. Summoning every scrap of courage, he lunged across the room, snatching a heavy iron candlestick from the floor. The figure shrieked, a sound like breaking glass, as Edward swung the candlestick against the clock's glass face. The pane shattered, shards flying across the room. With a cry, Edward drove the iron down upon the pendulum, bending it out of shape. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. No ticking, no voices, no breath. Then the figure dissolved into smoke, its outline scattering into nothing. The clocks fell silent, their hands frozen in place. Edward collapsed to his knees, chest heaving. The 12th chime never came. But as the silence settled, he realized something chilling. The letter in his hand had changed. New words bled across the page, written in the same old hand. The debt is only delayed. Blood will be taken when time demands it. Edward dropped the letter, his blood running cold. The curse had not been broken. Only postponed. And somewhere in the depths of the house, a single clock ticked once.